All right. So, let's say your business is a commodity or it's relatively commoditized. Is there anything you can do? Okay, so first of all, some good news. The good news about commoditized businesses is that it's usually fairly easy for people to understand what you do. You don't generally, it's not generally difficult to explain what the product or service is that you offer. There's a lot of brand or a lot of like product familiarity, okay? So if you sell cake and there's lots of other bakeries that sell cake, and you say, I sell cake, people know, hey, you sell cake, right? It's not that hard to know what you sell. If you say, I install drywall, well, people know what drywall is, and they know more or less how it looks after it's installed. And so you don't have to explain to people too much about what you do, right? So that's an advantage, if you will. Okay. Disadvantage is people assume that the service you offer is the same as everybody else, and unless you give them reason to believe otherwise, they will assume that the only way to decide whether or not to buy your product is based on price. And if you want to have an unpleasant life and an unsuccessful business, one of the ways to do that is to compete purely on price. So, not generally recommended by the gurus out there, and not really recommended by me either. Now, is that to say you can't have successful business and have competitive pricing? Of course not. I think it is possible to have both in some industries. Some industries, you almost cannot, by the way. But in some industries, you can have competitive pricing and enjoy success. Now, of course, in those cases, often it comes down to having a really good system for providing that product or service. And so your costs aren't high to produce that product or service, and it lets you enjoy enough margin to have a successful company. All right, so what can you do to make your product or service less of a commodity? There's no one size fits all here because it does vary from brand to brand. But here's a couple of ideas to get you going. Number one, describe your product or service more clearly or in more detail than other companies. So, going back to the cake example, you might describe the fact, or you might say, hey, we use organic flour sourced from beside the Nile in Egypt, and it has special unique properties. But that in that case, you may not have a commodity anymore, right? If you got something that's that special, right? So going back to actual commodity situation, right? You might say, hey, look, here's some really great pictures of the cakes that we make. Here's some videos, and you can watch people eating cake and look super delicious. Here are all the flavors of cake that we offer. Here's our wonderful staff making cake. Our cake has XYZ, ingredients in it. Now, they may be the same as everybody else's ingredients, but the fact that you actually took the time to say, look, these are the ingredients in our cake, it may help you stand out from the competition. All right, so just explaining your product or service more clearly. So even things that you think everyone knows exactly what they are, well, your customer's just not going to be as familiar, and sometimes, especially if it's their first time buying something. So let's say I'm going and I'm purchasing, a new roof, right? Okay. And I've never purchased a new roof before. So this roofing website I go to, they say, well, look, here's a process when you buy a new roof. First, here's the steps in the insurance process. And then next, we're going to tear off your old shingles. And this is what that looks like. And then we're going to see if your decking needs any repair, and we'll repair that if it needs to be repaired. And then we're going to go back on with so-and-so pound felt. Pound means it's so and such heaviness. And we use the best that's available, and it's really great. And then here are the shingles that we put on. And these shingles, so here's an example of what you can do when you don't have a special product. So let's say the non-special shingle, right, is the typical 3-tab shingle, okay? You can say, this is the shingle we put on. It's a 3-tab, which means it's got these 3 tabs on it. It's got this tar strip here, which is where the nails go in. That helps to seal it off where the nails go in. And it's fascinating, right? Because what you're describing is the standard issue, basically bottom of the barrel shingle, if you will, right? It's just normal grade, nothing special, not especially durable. But when you take the time to describe it in detail, sometimes people who are new to your product or service will appreciate that, will gravitate towards you because you were so clear in what you offered, okay? And you help to demystify it for them. So demystify your product or service if there's any issue with that. That's one way to set yourself apart from the competition. Now, another way to set yourself apart from the competition is to make the process of buying more easy, or to make the customer service better, okay? So going back to selling a roof, like maybe I can be really transparent about how the insurance process is, so there's no surprises there, and it removes some of my concerns about whether you're kind of a sleazy roofer, let's say. Maybe I have a little pamphlet that describes, okay, first we're going to do insurance, and then we're going to first we're going to assess your roof, then we're going to do insurance, and then we're going to do the actual tear off. We'll put the roof back on. Here's how much time it normally takes. And here is our automated link where you can schedule your roof inspection. And then our customer service agent calls you every step of the way, make sure that you're always aware of what's going on, what the next step is, and when you're going to get done. So better service is another way to differentiate yourself. And that ties in closely with this next one, which is reputation management. So what is the reputation that you have online specifically? Now, of course, in person also matters, like a referral business, right? But what is the reputation you have in your online reviews, whether it's Google reviews, Yelp reviews, Facebook reviews? What's the rating that people give you? So you can sell the same thing as everybody else, but if you have better reviews and more reviews, that's a good, for someone who's not connected to anyone in your industry. Like if they're looking for a roofer, they don't have anybody they know who's a roofer, so there's no friends and family connection there. They're just looking for someone who'll do a good job and treat them fairly and be someone they can trust. Someone who has good reviews and has a lot of good reviews, that can help them go in your direction. So sometimes you can make a change to your product or service to be less of a commodity. Now, here's the thing that's kind of interesting. You could look at it and say, well, look, going back to the cake illustration, right? You could say, most people don't care about organic flour, okay? Or you could say, organic flour doesn't make any difference in how well the cake bakes, okay? Or we could say, we use a certain brand of butter, okay? That has people are familiar with this brand of butter, right? You could say, well, using that brand of butter doesn't make any difference how well the cake tastes, how good it tastes, how well it bakes up, any of that stuff. But if the consumer, recognizes that brand, maybe that's a good reason to use that specific butter. Or if the, let's say the organic flour, let's say for some reason that organic flour doesn't actually cost you any more than the regular flour. It doesn't affect the taste. There's really no difference to the customer, except it sounds a little bit cooler, it sounds a little more high-end. Okay? Now, you could argue, well, why would I do that? But you could do that. You could use the organic flour. You could use that special brand of butter, and then tell your customers, look, we do X, we do Z, or X, Y, and X, and we do Y, we do Z. And even if, and it may appeal to the customer, like, hey, this is a little extra special. Even if the thing itself doesn't maybe mean a ton to them, for you to describe, like, hey, this is how special our product is, they may still get that feeling of, wow, you really care about the kind of cakes you bake. You really care about the ingredients. This is a product that's not quite like that cake that's down the road, or it's not quite like the cake I can get from H-E-B. This is a little different. This is a little more special. So that's another way. Secondly, another way you can do is also build a bit more of a story around your brand, right? So this could be a founder story. It could be like, hey, I used to, I only ate cookies as a kid. And then when I grew up, I discovered cake. And I love cake. It's so awesome. Okay, that was kind of a cheesy example, but you get the idea, right? It could be like I discovered this thing. It was so amazing, I decided to start selling it. Okay, that's one story. Another thing is like, hey, we specialize in like, let's say old fashioned. Uh, okay. Here's an example. So there's a company that sells heirloom seeds, and I forget now what the name of the company is, but I think they're pretty well known. I think they're from Missouri or something like that. In some of their branding, at least, they were dressing up in kind of like 1800s style clothing, or I don't know, 1800s, 1900s, whatever clothing. Um, and I think they've got a store that kind of looks really old fashioned, maybe, and some things like that. So they're kind of creating this story of like uh, back in the good old days or whatever, like old fashions that kind of help to like go along with their heirloom seeds. Right now, there's lots and lots of seeds that are not hybrids, right? That are essentially qualify as heirloom, I would assume. I'm not a real seed expert here, but okay. Um, but they took sort of they took their product, if you will, which was seeds that are not like hybridized, right? They're not genetically modified or whatever. They're kind of old fashioned, if you will. And then they kind of built a little bit of an aura of the old fashioned around it. So you can build some aura around what you're doing. Let's say you're a software company and you do things with technology. Well, you might want to build the opposite aura. You might want to build an aura of really modern. In your branding, you might use, your staff, pictures of your staff in a really modern corporate setting, or you might have hip young people in it, or you might have futuristic looking elements to your branding and design, because you're trying to support the idea of technology and newness and innovation and those kinds of things, right? So you can build some feeling. You can create some branding that supports sort of that overall narrative of, let's say, with the software, we're going to provide new innovative tools, and here's our and when you kind of step inside their brand, everything sort of feels futuristic because they're so cutting edge, right? Whereas if you're selling something more old fashioned, you could create it to where it feels like you're stepping back in time inside that brand. Now, you might still be selling the exact same thing. Like, I'm sure you can probably buy heirloom seeds from tons and tons of places. But maybe it doesn't feel quite so special because the people in the catalog are dressed up like people from pioneer days. So there's things like that you can do that can help to differentiate yourself. Even if you're selling a commodity, ultimately, there are still things you can do to become less of a commodity. And remember that being a commodity is not all bad. People generally know what you sell, and if you can do a better job selling it than other people, it's still possible to be very successful.